a street musician shared his only coin with a hungry child. The next morning, a caravan of luxury cars arrived at his shack, and a grey morning in that slum neighborhood. The air smells of dust and dampness. The streets are dotted with stagnant puddles, and the walls, barely propped up by tin and cardboard, are covered in faded graffiti. Off to one side, some exposed wires hang precariously, while the faint murmur of old radios mixes with whispers from half-open windows. Rafa, the neighborhood paperboy, shouts out outdated newspapers with the same resigned energy as every day. The jingle of keys accompanies Mrs. Margaret as she checks her padlock before returning to her kitchen. Small, everyday scenes weave together in a mosaic of survival. In the midst of this atmosphere, Thomas, a man in his 40s, grey and unruly hair, hands hardened by sun and rough labor, strums melancholic chords on his guitar in front of a closed shop. His voice, hoarse from cold and sleepless nights, sings fragments of old songs that no one remembers anymore, but can still coax a few coins from hurried passers-by. Rafa approaches, wearing his usual mocking tone and waving an old newspaper. "Not even the sun came out to buy you a song today, Thomas. You ever think about adding to your repertoire?" Thomas looks up, resigned yet somehow accomplice to the joke, and answers with a half-smile. "The sun's feeling lazy, Rafa. At least you're still loyal to my free concerts." Meanwhile, from her rickety doorway, Mrs. Margaret extends a plate of steaming broth with a comforting aroma. "Here, son. On an empty stomach, you won't make it halfway through the day. Eat." Thomas accepts the plate with genuine gratitude. That small gesture of solidarity is worth more than the scattered coins in his guitar case. Between warm spoonfuls, he listens to the voices, the fragile life of the neighborhood, and he knows that although his youthful dreams of succeeding as a musician are long gone, he still finds some spark of humanity amid these dusty streets. The camera pulls back slowly, focusing on Thomas's face. His eyes let slip a silent note of nostalgia. He no longer longs for bright stages or thunderous applause. He just waits, with his guitar and his roughened voice, for one more day of existence. Night has fallen like a damp cloak over the neighborhood. The rain, steady and cold, bathes the streets, forming uneven puddles in the asphalt's hollows. A tired, ancient street lamp flickers without conviction, casting trembling shadows on the tin walls and faded facades. Thomas, the end of his workday clinging to his bones, stores his guitar in a plastic bag, protecting that only treasure with hands both expert and gentle. The faint jingle of a few coins in his pocket reminds him of his harsh reality. Seeking shelter from the rain, he ventures down a narrow sidewalk. There, under a dripping metal awning, he finds Jimmy, a barefoot child, dressed in clothes so worn that the fabric is almost a whisper. His frightened gaze reflects nights without a roof and days without bread. Thomas crouches down and asks him, as softly as he can, "Are you alone? Are you hungry?" The child does not respond. His glassy eyes capture Thomas's image with skepticism, as if unsure whether to believe in the humanity of this strange man with a guitar. Without pressing him, Thomas reaches into his pocket and finds his last coin, a small metal disc that, though minuscule, is his sole resource. He holds it between his fingers for a few seconds, aware of the sacrifice it represents. "Here," he says quietly, holding out his hand. "Buy yourself something to eat." Jimmy nods silently, without uttering a word, but there's a spark of relief and gratitude in his eyes. This exchange is brief, fragile, yet also transcendent. In the midst of the wet night, compassion flickers like a warm ember. Afterward, Thomas continues on to his home, a room whose cardboard walls lean against a wall, a makeshift refuge that barely keeps out the cold. Inside, there's a simple bed and an old little table. On it sits a yellowed photo of his father, who was also a guitarist in his youth. Outside, the rain continues its insistent song, and wrapped in shadow, Thomas thinks of the boy. He wonders what fate awaits him, what hunger that solitary coin will ease. Raindrops drum on the cardboard roof, reminding him of his own vulnerability, as he falls asleep with the echo of his good deed pulsing in the silence. Morning breaks with a different vibration in the neighborhood. Last night's rain has left shining puddles on the street, irregular mirrors where the sun refuses to show itself fully. Suddenly, the deep sound of engines draws everyone's attention. In the distance, a line of black cars with flawless bodies presses forward like an escort from another world. Neighbors peer out from behind ill-fitting doors, through gaps in windows and splintered wooden shutters. Astonishment and curiosity spread through the air. Thomas, guitar slung over his shoulder and weariness in his body, steps outside. He blinks, incredulous at the luxurious caravan that stands in stark contrast to the rusted tin and chipped paint around him. A distinguished man steps out of the first car. He wears a dark suit, carries a fine leather briefcase, and exudes the bearing of someone used to power. He walks steadily over the neighborhood's mud without batting an eye. "Are you Thomas?" he asks firmly. Thomas nods, perplexed. The man introduces himself. "I'm Michael, the Montemayor family's attorney. Last night you helped a child, correct? That child is Jimmy Montemayor, missing for weeks." Thomas's heart races. Jimmy? The barefoot, silent boy? He can't understand why a powerful lawyer would talk to him. A wealthy family, well known in the region, now points to him as their heir's savior. Neighbors like Rafa and Mrs. Margaret watch from afar, not daring to speak. Michael clarifies the situation. "Jimmy mentioned your name. He said you offered him help. The family is enormously grateful and would like to speak with you." Thomas blinks, dazed. He's aware something huge is happening. This family, likely wealthier than his entire neighborhood combined, is inviting him. A fleeting thought crosses his mind. Could this change his luck? Could it end his life of hunger and hardship? "They want you to come with us to the Montemayor mansion," Michael continues, pointing to one of the cars. "Just a few hours to talk, clear things up, and understand how you found Jimmy." Thomas looks around. The poor streets, the cardboard roof of his room, the hard indifference of the life he leads. Then he looks at the cars, the gleam of their metal, the implicit promise. He agrees, with a knot in his stomach and a certain wariness. As he moves toward the car, the eyes of his neighbors follow him. In his mind, the uncertainty of this unexpected turn echoes, something that might carry him far from the dusty streets where he has always struggled to survive. The engine's roar as it starts up reverberates through the neighborhood streets like a sign of rupture. Thomas, clutching his guitar tightly against his chest, climbs into one of the black cars under the astonished gaze of Rafa, Mrs. Margaret, and the other neighbors. Their voices overlap in murmurs. "Where are they taking you, Thomas?" someone shouts worriedly. But the door closes. The tinted window isolates the inside of the vehicle from the outside world, and Thomas has no answer to give them. The car sets off, and the camera shows a radical change in scenery. The narrow, dusty neighborhood streets soon give way to wide avenues lined with neatly trimmed trees. Gardens with statues, discreet fountains, and high walls reveal the city's opposite face, opulence and order. Thomas, frowning, takes in these postcards he once only imagined from afar as unreachable stages. Finally, the caravan arrives at a large wrought iron gate that opens smoothly when an impeccably dressed butler gives the signal. Beyond the gate, a gravel path leads to a colonial-style mansion with light-colored walls and hanging vines. Ancient statues adorn the garden, and the unseen birdsong replaces the street calls he knows so well. The car stops. Michael gets out first and gestures for Thomas to do the same. He steps out, unsure, holding his guitar tightly as though it were his shield against this foreign world. His calloused hands, his worn clothes, his sun-marked skin painfully contrast with the flawless perfection around him. For the first time, a dense unease settles in his chest. What will he find behind these mansion doors? He senses that the answer will change his life forever. Crossing a pair of solid wooden doors, Thomas enters the mansion's main hall. The contrast with his own world is overwhelming. The marble floor reflects the dim light of a crystal chandelier. The walls display portraits of stern-faced ancestors, and a carved wooden staircase leads up to upper floors that promise even more splendor. Each step he takes produces a hollow echo, as though he were entering a sacred foreign space. The guitar in his hand feels clumsy, out of place in such an imposing setting. In the center of the room, the Montemayor family awaits him. The first to stand out is Mercedes, a woman of aristocratic bearing, grey hair gathered in an impeccable bun, dressed in an elegant gown of soft hues. She greets him with a slight nod, no smile, her expression blending curiosity with a barely perceptible hint of disdain. Beside her is Elisa, Jimmy's mother. Her face is haggard, dark circles under her eyes and redness betraying nights of weeping and worry. With a trembling voice, she comes so close to Thomas, she almost brushes his arm. "Thank you. Thank you for taking care of my son," she whispers, in a tone that distills relief and gratitude. Off to one side stands Leonardo, Jimmy's uncle, stiff posture, jaw clenched, gaze as sharp as a knife. He watches Thomas with the wariness of someone guarding his territory, scrutinizing every feature, every gesture, as if assessing a threat. A few steps away, almost blending with the shadows, Jenna, the housekeeper, remains silent. Her slightly more distant stance denotes respect and discretion. Her eyes, however, show full attention, capturing details that others overlook. Marina, the nurse, introduces herself with a timid smile and a gentle gesture. "I'm Marina. If you need anything, I'm at your disposal," she says without pomp, conveying a simple warmth. Esteban, Jimmy's cousin, stays at the back, almost hidden behind an antique piece of furniture. He is sweating, avoiding eye contact with Thomas, as though afraid this stranger might recognize him or uncover some hidden secret. Occasionally, he tilts his head and swallows hard. Thomas, dazed, feels as if he has landed on another planet. This family, so different from the sun-weathered faces and poverty of his neighborhood, observes him intensely. His mind can't stop wondering what they want from him. Still, in Elisa's gaze and Marina's smile, he finds a hint of humanity. Perhaps, he thinks, not everything in this place is cold and distant. When the door opens, Jimmy, still marked by distrust, bursts into the main hall without noticing his family's presence. He instinctively clings to Thomas's leg, using him as a protective shield. Surprised, Thomas looks down and recognizes in those eyes the same fear he saw beneath the metal awning the night before. Elisa steps forward with arms outstretched toward the child. "Jimmy, my love," she says, her voice breaking. But at the slightest attempt to approach him, the little one pulls back, clutching Thomas's pant leg tightly. She sighs, holding back tears. The silence in the room grows dense, and one can sense the pain of a mother whose child avoids her. Desperate, Elisa turns to Thomas. "Please, sir, stay with us for a few days. Jimmy trusts you. I need him to feel once more that this is his home, his family. I don't know what has happened, but if you manage to get him to open up, maybe you can help me win him back." Mercedes, rigid but aware of the need, intervenes with a dry voice. "Of course, you will be properly compensated. We can offer you financial remuneration for your time." Thomas, uneasy, feels the weight of this proposal. The word money echoes in his mind. In his life, even the smallest coin is crucial. Yet the reason pushing him to accept isn't the money itself, but the look Jimmy gives him, the echo of that rainy night, and the hunger that ravaged the boy. He wants to help, even if he doesn't fully understand the situation. "I'll stay," he answers, nodding. "But I'm doing this for him, for Jimmy." Behind them all, in the hall's shadows, Leonardo watches the scene. His figure, lit only by the distant glow of a single lamp, is a sketch of hostility and mistrust. His cold eyes bore into Thomas, revealing displeasure. The camera captures the hard set of his jaw, his tense posture, as though the presence of this stranger in the mansion were an open wound to his pride or his plans. At this moment, however, for Thomas and Jimmy, the world narrows down to a simple, urgent task: rebuilding the bridge of trust that separates the child from his home. And although the mansion's shadows stretch out silently, compassion at last seems to have found a place amid all the opulence. Jimmy's room is a space that seems suspended between two worlds. There are pristine toys, books with bright illustrations, and a small varnished wooden bed. Still, the corners feel empty, as if missing the warmth and laughter of childhood. With his guitar leaning against a wall, Thomas helps Marina straighten up the boy's things. She points to the dresser, where a few items have gotten mixed up with wrinkled clothes. Moving a stack of children's garments, Thomas finds a strange piece of fabric. It bears the image of a black rose embroidered in gold thread, a design out of place in the rest of the room. He holds it between his fingers, surprised by the delicacy and unusual elegance of the embroidery. At that moment, Jenna, the housekeeper, appears at the door. Approaching silently, she warns in a very low voice, "That mark, I know who uses it. Dangerous people. There are murky agreements in this family's past. Be careful, Mr. Thomas." The warning leaves Thomas uneasy. Jimmy's disappearance no longer seems a simple case of getting lost. Something darker is at play around the child, something that could put him in danger. Thomas feels the unease settling in his chest. He needs to understand. He needs to protect him. That black rose could be a key to secrets the family prefers to keep hidden. Meanwhile, back in the neighborhood, Rafa and Mrs. Margaret wonder where Thomas is, that man who played his guitar in front of the closed shop and shared broth with the neighbors. The musician's absence is felt in the dusty streets. Meanwhile, Alfred appears, prowling, questioning anyone he comes across. "Have you seen Thomas? Do you know who he left with?" he asks, with a calculating look, clearly interested in more than mere curiosity. The tension stretches, invisible, connecting the mansion's quiet luxury with the noisy poverty of the bario. Thomas, holding the scrap of fabric, understands that every step he takes now could affect not only his own fate, but also the future of a child who sees him as his only source of trust. The afternoon sun casts a soft light over the Montemayor mansion's corridors. Thomas, guitar in hand, walks silently through the interior, observing the family's interactions. Mercedes issues orders to the staff in an authoritarian tone that barely masks a certain anxiety. Elisa, her eyes tired, never stops asking after Jimmy. Now and then she peeks through a doorway or hurries upstairs, hoping to find her child calmer, less afraid. Off to the side, Leonardo keeps his distance, as if his thoughts were an impenetrable armor. Every gesture of his exudes coldness. Esteban, on the other hand, can't hide his nerves. He fidgets, clears his throat, runs his hand over the back of his neck. There's something concealed in his gestures, in the tension simmering between these walls. Tired of so much rigidity, Thomas retreats to the winter garden. There, among climbing vines and glass panels that let in the light, he finds Marina. With her gentle smile and empathetic gaze, she asks him to sit down. The family has gone through many financial scandals, the nurse admits, gently brushing a green leaf. Damian, the patriarch, left behind a complicated will. He conditioned the fortune with certain difficult clauses. It's known that he supported social causes, cultural projects, things the current family doesn't fully value. Jimmy is key to steering that inheritance toward what Damian intended. Marina gives a sad smile before adding, "You, Thomas, seem to be the only person Jimmy trusts right now. Your presence brings him peace. Perhaps you can be the bridge everyone needs." As the garden's calm envelopes her words, back in the barrio, Alfred lingers around Thomas's humble home. He questions neighbors, probing about the caravan of luxury cars that took the guitarist away. He seeks clues, muttering promises of reward to anyone who might provide information. His eyes gleam with ambition. If Thomas has now stepped into the world of the wealthy, maybe Alfred can get something out of it. He plans to exploit the situation, to profit from any advantage that arises. The tension flows in two directions. At the mansion, the family's turbulent past entwines with Jimmy's uncertain present. In the neighborhood, Alfred's intrigue rises like a shadow that could disrupt any outcome. And Thomas, caught between these two worlds, feels the responsibility of protecting the child growing heavier with each passing minute. The mansion's dining room, lit by a chandelier, becomes a realm of whispers and furtive glances when Thomas is not present. The Montemayor family sits around a polished dark wooden table, but the furniture's gleam contrasts with the dull tone of their conversation. Elisa, her face still marked by anxiety, breaks the silence. "I demand to know the truth. What happened to Jimmy? Who's behind his disappearance?" Her voice, though contained, trembles with indignation and pain. Leonardo, frowning, looks away. "I already told you, Elisa. I know nothing. Why do you insist on seeing me as guilty?" Mercedes, upright and distant, shakes her head, feigning ignorance. "It makes no sense to stir up the past, my dear. The important thing is that Jimmy is here now, isn't it?" Esteban, pale, nervously toys with his napkin. He sweats, crumples it, seems on the verge of falling apart. The atmosphere is so tense that the soft clinking of cutlery against porcelain feels like a metallic blow in the silence. Meanwhile, Thomas stands in the adjacent hallway. Unseen, he approaches a slightly ajar door. Behind it, he can hear the voices of Michael and Jenna. The lawyer mentions the name of Damian, the deceased patriarch, and the famous clauses of the will. He speaks of Jimmy with a somber tone, as if the boy were a crucial piece in a financial puzzle. Jenna nods, her voice laced with worry. If the child doesn't return to his natural environment, the terms of the will could change the fortune's course. It's what Damian intended. With his back pressed against the wall, Thomas feels a chill run up his spine. Now he understands. Jimmy is not just a frightened boy. He's the key that determines the fate of an entire fortune. There are those who need him close to fulfill the conditions of the will, and perhaps others who'd rather see him far away, or even gone for good. The intrigue grows thicker. Thomas has deduced that this story involves more than just emotions. There are hidden and immense interests at stake. The child he protected in the rain is a center of power. And in a family fraught with internal tensions, that makes Jimmy a delicate target. The question now beating in Thomas's mind is, who would benefit from silencing or removing him? Without immediate answers, the tension ratchets up another notch in this staircase of secrets. Night slips into the mansion with an almost poetic stealth. Outside in the gardens, the chirping of crickets mixes with the gentle murmur of a fountain, while the moon casts elongated shadows over gravel paths. Inside, the silence weighs heavily, and the rooms seem to hold their breath, as though veiled secrets hover behind the old walls. Thomas, guitar in its case and heart on alert, decides it's time to seek answers. He knows Michael, the lawyer, keeps documents in the library. He's glimpsed it, a spacious room lined with shelves full of leather-bound volumes, a sturdy oak desk, and a yellowish desk lamp illuminating half-reviewed papers. He moves in the dark along the hallways, taking care not to tread too heavily on the wooden floor. Every creak could give him away. Upon reaching the library door, he pushes it gently. It's unlocked. Inside, the smell of old paper and varnish hits his nostrils. Guided by intuition, he approaches Michael's desk, opening the drawers with trembling hands. Some documents concern properties, others are formal correspondence. And there, almost hidden under a thick folder, he finds papers mentioning a trust. Frowning, Thomas flips through the pages under the lamp's faint glow. Some lines stand out. If Jimmy remains alive, healthy, and reaches a certain stipulated age, Most of the Montemayor fortune will pass into a set of charitable ventures, scholarships for young musicians, cultural centers, art schools in poor neighborhoods, a philanthropic vision that Damian, the patriarch, wanted to preserve beyond the family's ambitions. Without Jimmy, or if something were to happen to him before the deadline, those funds would revert to the family, divided among its members, multiplying their wealth. This discovery is a sudden flash of clarity. Now he understands the tense looks, the evasive behavior, the wary attitudes about Jimmy. This frightened, fragile child is a hinge between greed and the common good. Someone might have made him disappear to ensure that fortune wouldn't slip out of their grasp. Thomas commits this information to memory and leaves the library with his heart pounding. He knows more now, and with that comes greater danger. Upon returning to his makeshift room, he finds Jimmy sitting on the bed, knees drawn up. The child isn't sleeping. In the dim light, his small silhouette is outlined against the wall. Seeing him, Thomas sits at his side, takes out the guitar, and starts softly strumming an old lullaby, a melody he remembers from his father's repertoire. "Do you like music, Jimmy?" he asks softly. The child nods, blinking as he relaxes a bit. As the notes fill the silence, Jimmy leans closer, trusting, and whispers, "A man told me not to trust the one with cold eyes." A chill runs down Thomas's spine. The one with cold eyes. Could he mean Leonardo? That uncle with the icy, controlled gaze, that distant, calculating figure. Thomas replays the hours spent in the mansion, the whispers, the veiled accusations, Esteban's constant nervous trembling. Jimmy's warning now fits with his suspicions. There's little doubt that Leonardo is a key piece in this scheme. The child calms down with the song, seems more willing to talk, but soon grows tired, his mood shifting. He finally lets out a sigh, curls up against the pillow, and closes his eyes. Thomas puts the guitar away, gently ruffling the boy's tangled hair. A paternal impulse, a tenderness he never thought he'd feel, wells up inside him. A few minutes later, a soft knock on the door alerts him. Upon opening it, he finds Elisa. Her eyes are red, her face ashen. She clings to the doorframe, her voice trembling. "Mr. Thomas, I need your help. I can't approach Jimmy without him getting frightened. You've managed to earn his trust, to calm him, to make him speak. Please, help me understand him, to show him that I love him, that this is his home, his family." Her tears blur her voice. "I'll do anything to get him back." Thomas senses the sincerity in every word. Elisa doesn't want money, fame, or anything but her child's affection. Compassion weighs on his heart, and at the same time, he understands the magnitude of his role. He agrees with a slight nod, unable to ignore her genuine maternal pain. As he closes the door, Thomas knows the balance of power in the mansion isn't even. On one side, a suffering mother. On the other, someone willing to do anything to achieve murky ends. And in the center, that innocent child, placing his trust in a street musician he barely knew. Thomas feels that, from now on, every step he takes could tip the scales either toward justice or into the abyss. Night becomes an accomplice to the shadows in the mansion's side garden. Away from the main lights, where the grass grows a bit taller and some branches creak in the wind, Leonardo meets with Rick. The stranger has a scar across his cheek and a peculiar tattoo on his left wrist, a black rose with golden threads. His worn clothing and rigid stance contrast with Leonardo's restrained elegance. They believe they are alone, surrounded by a silence that vibrates with conspiratorial tension. "If the brat stays here," Rick growls in a raspy voice, "the money slips out of our hands and into charity." Damian set it up well. He tied the fortune to the kid's survival. Leonardo clenches his fists, jaw tight, gaze icy. "I won't let my late uncle's absurd dream come true. That fortune belongs to the family. It's ours by right." "Then we have to remove him from the game again," Rick points out. "And this time, no mistakes. No returning him to his mother. The kid must vanish. Leonardo nods, his stifled rage emanating from every word. Take the child far away, anywhere, any fate, as long as he isn't here at the appointed age. Do it soon. On the other side of the mansion, in a small room adjoining the kitchen, Thomas sits on an improvised stool, nursing a slight hand wound. It's a superficial cut he got while handling something in the garden. Marina approaches with a simple first aid kit and clean cloths. Her hands, gentle and careful, clean the wound delicately. While applying the gauze, she speaks in a calm voice. You know, Mr. Thomas, I had dreams too. I wanted to be a singer, to step onto a stage and feel the applause of the crowd. I never had the opportunity. And now I take care of the sick, tidy up medicines. I'm not complaining, but I sometimes wonder where my ambitions ended up. Thomas feels a sharp empathy. He too had dreams. Music was his great love, the imagined stage that never came. He studies Marina, young, kind, with a quiet sadness in her gaze that he understands all too well. Sometimes life leads us astray, he answers with a half smile. I thought I'd be a famous musician, but I ended up playing on the street for a few coins. Still, look at us here, trying to help a child who needs it. Maybe it's not the stage we dreamed of, but we're doing something that matters. She lowers her eyes, smiling faintly, and an invisible bridge extends between them, an emerging bond of understanding. Amid bandages and confessions, their souls touch more closely than any words they've shared so far. Suddenly, a new voice breaks the calm. A guard appears at the door. Mr. Thomas, there's someone asking for you at the entrance. He says his name is Alfred. Thomas stands, pulse racing. Alfred, the neighbor from the bario, snooping around this mansion. He quickly heads to the main porch. There he finds the man trying to slip past security. Alfred puts on a show of false concern. Thomas, my friend, look at this luxury you've gotten into. I was worried, didn't know where you were. When I saw these cars, I knew you were with important people. He pauses, then leans in, revealing his hand. Say, don't you have a little something for an old pal? Let's say, something in exchange for my silence. I know you're rubbing elbows with the rich now, right? I can talk about it, or I can keep quiet. Your choice. Anger burns in Thomas's throat. Alfred, who barely spoke to him before, now wants to squeeze him with veiled threats. Instead of backing down, Thomas steps closer, voice low but firm. Listen, Alfred, I don't know what you imagine, but I haven't sold out. I'm here for a child who needs help, nothing more. And if you think you can get something from me, you're wasting your time. Leave now, before I call the police. Alfred opens his mouth, surprised by the refusal, but Thomas's determined gaze and the guard's presence convince him not to push further. With a contemptuous gesture, he leaves, muttering under his breath. Thomas returns inside, heart pounding. Marina waits in the hallway, her eyes full of questions. He shakes his head, downplaying it. There are greater threats inside, within the family itself, lurking around Jimmy. As he climbs the stairs, thinking of the child he's trying to protect, he recalls Rick's words overheard in the library. The black rose, the shady deals, the will. He must proceed with caution. The mansion's world, with its intrigues, has already upended his life completely. Now he must remain steadfast, for Jimmy, for Elisa, and for the promise that something better can still bloom out of so much darkness. Night drapes the Montemayor mansion with a mantle of unease. As the final light of dusk fades, the windows reflect a sky tinted violet and orange, while inside the hallways fill with silent footsteps and furtive glances. This is no ordinary night. There's tension in the air, a latent electricity announcing an imminent clash of wills. In one of the secondary salons, far from the bustle of the common areas, Leonardo leans against a wall, his face contorted with contained fury. At his side, Esteban, forehead sweaty, listens to his cousin's halting commands. You must help Rick this time. Thomas stuck his nose in where he wasn't wanted. Jimmy must disappear, understand? If that child stays here, the fortune slips away from us. Esteban gulps hard. His hands tremble, fiddling with the buttons of his shirt, unable to meet Leonardo's gaze. But what if we get caught? What will Elisa say? And the police? Leonardo silences him with a venomous hiss. Shut up. You're already involved. Now obey. If you don't, not only will you be ruined, you'll put everyone at risk. Do what you must, Esteban, or you'll regret it. Meanwhile, on the lower floor, Michael, the family's lawyer, stops in a dark corridor near the winter garden. He watches Thomas walk by, brow furrowed, guitar slung over his back. He notices the tension in the musician's shoulders, how he glances around as if piecing together the fragments of an invisible puzzle. Michael knows Thomas has been investigating and now understands part of the mechanism behind Damian's will. What to do, the lawyer wonders. Obey the Montemayor family, who employs him and pays his fees, or honor the late patriarch's final wish, who wanted his fortune to serve social good and justice. The dilemma splits his spirit in two. If he helps Thomas protect the child, he might betray his employers. But if he remains loyal to the Montemayors without intervening, he'll be party to a moral crime. With his hands in his pockets and his heart divided, Michael watches Thomas disappear behind a door. He has not yet decided, but the night is long and tensions will not relent. In the hallway leading to the bedrooms, Marina crosses paths with Thomas. The young nurse carries a basket of clean towels and her eyes show concern. She approaches with quiet steps. "Mr. Thomas, be careful tonight," she whispers, tilting her head toward the far end of the hall, where two guards are speaking in hushed tones. Something strange is going on. Orders at odd hours, many whispers, evasive glances. I feel they're planning something. Thomas nods gravely. He too has noticed the mansion's nervous tension. It's as if everyone is awaiting a thunderclap in a stormless night. "Thank you, Marina," he answers softly. "I'll watch my steps." At the same time, back in the barrio, Thomas calls home. The musician's absence unsettles his neighbors. The yellow glow of the bare bulbs hung over dusty streets reveals a small group gathered near the closed shop where Thomas once played. Rafa, an old newspaper in hand, and Mrs. Margaret, arms folded, listen to Alfred's venomous words. "Don't you see it? Thomas sold out to the rich. He left in their black cars and never looked back. I bet he wants nothing to do with us now. Forgot all about the misery we live in." The neighbors exchange uneasy glances. Some murmur doubts. But Rafa, crumpling the newspaper, refuses to believe it. "I've known Thomas for years. He's not the kind of man who'd abandon people like that. There must be a reason." Mrs. Margaret inclines her head, recalling the weary, honest look on the musician's face. "I saw him share his last coin with a hungry child. You don't bury that kind of generosity so easily." Alfred clicks his tongue in annoyance, trying to sow more distrust, but not everyone is willing to swallow his insinuations. The barrio's air carries a hope that Thomas has not been corrupted. Time will tell. Meanwhile, seeds of rumor spread, testing the neighbors' trust. Back at the mansion, Esteban's hands still tremble at Leonardo's demands. Thomas, unaware of that clandestine meeting, mentally reviews his next step. He must protect Jimmy, warn Elisa, and find a way to thwart any plan without endangering the child's life. Marina's warning makes him feel less alone, and the mere idea that Michael might side with justice sparks a glimmer of hope. Night falls like a silent executioner over the mansion, and opposing forces prepare for an inevitable clash. Simultaneously, in the barrio, the battle for Thomas's reputation is fought with rumors and shared memories. On one side, greed and betrayal. On the other, loyalty, compassion, and courage. The curtain of this family tragedy is about to rise. The night wears tension like a mantle, as the Montemayor family and Thomas gather in the main dining room for dinner. The long table, covered with a linen cloth, is lit by silver candelabras, casting soft reflections on crystal glasses. Elisa sits near Jimmy, trying to convey security, while Mercedes presides at the opposite end, chin raised, marked silence. Leonardo sits to one side, alert to every detail, and Esteban, forehead beaded with sweat, is tasked with serving the wine. The atmosphere is dense, as if all sense some invisible danger circling the walls. Thomas notices, out of the corner of his eye, how Esteban pours wine into the glasses with trembling hands. Jenna's timely whispered warning echoes in his mind. "Don't drink tonight, Mr. Thomas. They've added something to the wine." Discreetly, when the glass reaches him, Thomas only moistens his lips, not swallowing a drop. The others, unaware of the malice, drink amid murmurs and half-concealed tensions. Jimmy, his eyes large and bright, doesn't taste the wine, but senses the growing unease. His small hand tightens the napkin in his lap. The dinner passes with uncomfortable silences. Elisa makes an effort to talk, to ask about Jimmy's well-being, to ease the atmosphere, but Leonardo responds in monosyllables. Mercedes deflects the topic, and Esteban merely pretends normalcy. Michael, seated in a corner, fiddles with his fork, avoiding taking a stand. Marina serves some salad and tries to smile at Thomas, as if recalling the silent pact of mutual care they've established. Eventually, the meal ends with a murmur of excuses. One by one, they retire to their rooms, heads heavy, eyelids heavier than usual. Later that night, the mansion sinks into thick silence. Moonlight slides over garden statues, and the night breeze caresses the partially opened curtains. Thomas settles into an armchair in the hallway, leading to Jimmy's room. Pretending to sleep, he keeps his ears alert and his muscles tense. Jenna had discreetly prepared this improvised guard post. The child sleeps in his room, a small bedside lamp barely illuminating his worried face. Around midnight, stealthy footsteps and the slight creak of a window announce Rick's arrival. He's brought two men with grim faces, dressed in black, the same men Thomas sensed from previous conspiracies. With enviable skill, they slip into the child's room almost noiselessly. Jimmy stirs uneasily in bed, waking with a start when he sees the silhouettes surrounding him. Panic flickers in his eyes. In the hallway, Thomas opens one eye, alert to the slightest sound. Jenna's absence, she withdrew for her own safety, forces him to rely on himself. Rising with as much agility as his years and street experience allow, he moves calmly toward the door. He pushes it open carefully and finds the feared scene. Rick leaning over the bed, trying to cover Jimmy's mouth with a gloved hand, while the other two men prepare to lift the child. Thomas's heart pounds in his temples, but he doesn't hesitate. Without a word, he launches himself at Rick. At first, the struggle is rough and silent, a clash of wills in the dim light. Rick, taller and stronger, lands a punch on Thomas's arm, causing sharp pain. Despite the blow, Thomas clings to the attacker, preventing him from holding Jimmy. The frightened child sobs softly, seeking Thomas's gaze. Time seems to slow, every second an eternity. In the midst of chaos, the door opens again. Marina, alerted by a noise or a hunch, enters holding a table lamp with both hands. With courage and trembling nerves, she brandishes it at one of the henchmen, who tries to shove her aside. Marina steps back and tries again, creating just enough confusion for Thomas to free Jimmy from Rick's grip. The man, surprised by the sudden interference, steps back. The criminals have lost the element of surprise. Jimmy's voice, now tearful, begins to rise. In the distance, footsteps echo in the hallway. Lights could be switched on at any moment. Rick exchanges a glance with his men. This has turned messy. They know discretion was key, and forcing the issue could lead to their downfall. Reluctantly, seeing themselves outmaneuvered by the brewing commotion, they choose to flee. They jump through the same window they entered, leaving behind ragged breaths and fear suspended in the air. Thomas straightens up, bracing a hand against the window frame, breathing hard. His injured arm throbs with each heartbeat, but the satisfaction of having prevented the child's abduction is worth any wound. Marina, trembling, places the lamp back on the nightstand. Jimmy, cheeks wet with tears, clings to Thomas's arm like a rescued castaway. In the corridors beyond, voices of astonishment and worry begin to stir, echoes of a family waking up to a reality they tried to deny. From this encounter, Thomas emerges with an aching body, but a firmer spirit. He has thwarted a second kidnapping attempt, defended Jimmy, and unmasked a real danger. With the criminals fleeing, everyone in the mansion will now have to face the consequences of so much hidden betrayal. As for him, he braces for the coming storm. Loyalty, greed, and courage have clashed tonight, laying bare the rot that some tried to hide behind their luxurious walls. By morning, the mansion awakens to a commotion unlike any other night. Lights flicker on, hurried footsteps resounding on stairs and halls. Elisa's agitated voice in the corridor mixes with Mercedes's tense whispers, Esteban's labored breathing, and Leonardo's guilty silence looming over it all. Jimmy, sheltered in Thomas's arms, is no longer crying, but his still wet eyes reflect the terror he's endured. Marina, pale, stays close by, a silent guardian ready to help again if needed. Jenna, the housekeeper, bursts in with a bowl of warm water and clean cloths. Without a word, she signals Thomas to sit in a vestibule armchair, away from prying eyes. With firm, caring hands, she cleans the wound on his arm. Her touch is gentle, almost maternal. Between compresses, Jenna speaks softly, ensuring no hostile ears overhear. Damian, this family's patriarch, wasn't like the Montemayors you see now. Years ago, before he died, he sponsored young musicians with scholarships and opportunities. You, Thomas, received your first guitar thanks to him, without knowing it. He paid for the instrument you secretly cherished. He wanted art, music, and education to reach those in need. Thomas, startled, fixes his gaze on Jenna. Damian had invested in his future without his knowledge. He recalls that guitar from his youth, the one he used to learn his first chords, which he believed he'd bought with small, hard-earned savings. Apparently, an unseen hand wanted to see a young bario musician succeed. The revelation makes the pieces fall into place. Damian's will clause, the hope vested in Jimmy, Leonardo's anger. Jimmy isn't just an heir to a surname, he's the key that can unlock a fortune destined for the common good. Without the child, the wealth returns to the family's hands, feeding greed and filling private bank accounts. With him safe and sound, Damian's will is fulfilled. Scholarships, cultural centers, instruments for underprivileged children, opportunities to dream. Thomas understands the monumental responsibility resting on those small shoulders, and why some inside the mansion fight tooth and nail to keep Jimmy from staying there. As Jenna finishes bandaging Thomas's arm, a collision of forces erupts in the next room. Elisa, heart pounding furiously in her chest, confronts Leonardo, who remains cold as the marble statues in the garden. "Are you behind this, Leonardo?" Her once soft and submissive voice now lashes out like a whip. "My son, my own son, the one you tried to take from me." Leonardo does not deny the accusation. His smile is a cruel slash. "You don't know what you've gotten into, Elisa. The family's money is at stake. Do you really think I'll let Damian's philanthropic whim dictate our fate?" Elisa steps closer, and though her body trembles, her voice stands firm as a banner of rage and pain. "I won't let you harm Jimmy. He is my own flesh and blood, and I will do whatever it takes to protect him. If you thought you could intimidate me, you were wrong. I will put an end to your plans, no matter the cost." Leonardo doesn't respond with words, only with a mocking look sharper than any insult. Yet beneath that mask of contempt, something cracks. The certainty that his scheme would go unpunished. The family has begun to fracture between those who crave power and those who seek justice. Wedged into that fissure, is Thomas's determined presence. This street musician, whom Damian, in his generous vision, helped without ever knowing him. On this night, full of exposed secrets and fallen masks, Thomas feels the weight of his role. He cannot back down now. With his arm bandaged, Jimmy safe at his side, and Marina close by, he knows that Damian's legacy, the man he never knew but who believed in the transformative power of art, must prevail. Jenna watches with bright eyes, appreciating the courage of the few who dare to stand against greed. Outside, the leaves whisper a prophecy. The battle for Jimmy's future and for the hope he embodies is only beginning. The air in the mansion grows heavier with each passing hour. After the failed kidnapping, many veils have fallen. Faces harden in the corridors, gazes turn suspicious. Yet a ray of light begins to filter through the darkness. Michael, the family's lawyer, finally crosses the line from neutrality to justice. Tired of Leonardo's machinations and complicit silences, he knocks on Thomas's door. The musician, arm still bandaged and guitar resting against the wall, is preparing for his next move. "Mr. Thomas," Michael says softly, closing the door behind him, "I've brought something you must see." He takes a bundle of documents from his briefcase and hands them over. "Here is the original copy of Damian's will. Read it carefully. He never intended to hoard wealth for the family, but rather to invest it in social welfare, schools, cultural centers, scholarships for emerging artists. That was his vision." Thomas turns the pages with awe and respect. In these lines, he recognizes the invisible hand that provided him with his first guitar years ago. He understands that Damian's goal was to transcend hollow opulence, to sow seeds of culture and education. Without Jimmy, the will loses its transformative power, and the fortune will fall into the hands of those who only wish to accumulate wealth. By revealing all this, Michael has taken a decisive step. "Thank you," Thomas replies, without letting go of the document. "Your help is essential." Meanwhile, in the bario where Thomas left behind his street life and broken dreams, Alfred continues spreading malicious rumors, now more vehemently. "Thomas is no longer one of us. He went off with the rich and surely lined his pockets. Why would he ever come back here?" Rafa, holding his newspaper, listens in silence. He stares at the ground, remembering the mornings Thomas played his guitar for a few coins. Next to him, Mrs. Margaret makes the sign of the cross, murmuring a prayer. The entire neighborhood is caught in a bitter tension. Will Thomas return without being seen as a traitor? Has he changed sides, or is he fighting for something greater? Doubts float in the air like ashes after a fire. Back at the mansion, Thomas gathers Marina and Elisa in a discreet corner. The will speaks for itself, and internal enemies are on the prowl. Elisa, her eyes still moist from confronting Leonardo, raises her voice determinedly. "We must report everything to the police right now. Jimmy will not be safe as long as those responsible roam free." Marina nods, rubbing her hands nervously. The idea of the police entering this seat of power is chilling, but necessary. Thomas, holding the will, feels that the time has come to bring the truth into the light of day. Jenna, the housekeeper, offers to make the discreet calls. Her steady, confident voice travels along the telephone line, contacting the authorities without revealing her identity. She knows whom to call and which words to use. With her help, the police will arrive when the family and their accomplices least expect it. As everyone prepares, the mansion becomes the stage for the final confrontation. Outside, the garden statues stand as mute witnesses to the unfolding story within these centuries-old walls. Inside, each participant assumes their role. Elisa and Marina protecting Jimmy, Michael holding the definitive proof of the will, Jenna bridging the outside world with this intrigue-ridden universe, and Thomas, hardened by a life lived outdoors, ready to risk whatever it takes to honor Damian's legacy. The tension grows, echoing through silent rooms. With the police on their way, time stretches and thickens, every minute a razor's edge. Beyond the mansion's walls, The bario watches from afar, unaware that its fate may change depending on this night's outcome. At the center of it all is Jimmy, a fragile child who unwittingly carries the power to redeem the Montemayor name and secure a future for many he will never meet, but who will benefit from his very existence. The night presses on, each step heavier, and the Montemayor mansion becomes a hive of invisible tensions. In a dimly lit room, far from the lamp's glow, Rick and Leonardo corner Thomas. The ancient furniture casts twisted shadows on the walls. Leonardo, cold-eyed and in a threatening whisper, drops his proposal without pretense. "Take the boy far away, Thomas. Leave him abandoned somewhere. We'll handle the rest. You'll get your share, enough money to escape poverty. Isn't that what you wanted?" Rick, with his scar and the black rose tattoo glimmering in the faint light, nods, reinforcing the offer. They think they have Thomas between a rock and a hard place, reading need and desperation on his humble features. They expect the lure of money to outweigh his conscience. But Thomas, jaw clenched, feels sickened by the proposition. His voice emerges rough, filled with contempt. "You think I'm like you, that I'd sell out an innocent child? You know nothing about me. Keep your dirty money. I won't help you destroy Jimmy's life." Leonardo's disappointment turns to rage, and Rick tenses, realizing it won't be so easy. Meanwhile, beyond the walls, hope advances on police wheels. Thanks to Elisa's calls and Michael's information, a patrol car makes its way through the streets, breaking into the night. Blue and red lights reflect off damp pavement. Upstairs, Mercedes, posted near a window, catches sight of those flashing lights in the distance. Her heart skips a beat. Something very serious is about to happen. She spent her life pretending ignorance about the family's inner tensions. Now, as police engines rumble in the distance, the chasm between her pride and reality widens. The world is closing in on Leonardo and his supporters. In the foyer, the echo of hurried footsteps signals the final confrontation. Leonardo tries to escape, rushing down the stairs before the police cross the threshold. But Thomas, having rejected Rick's sinister offer, appears to block his path. Flanked by Elisa, firmer than ever, her face lit with anger and determination, they stand together to bar his way. Behind Thomas, Jimmy grips his hand with all his might. He's trembling but not running away. This adult with the kind eyes and a guitar has been his refuge. The scene brims with drama. Leonardo, trapped, clicks his tongue in disdain, knowing time is running out. Through a side door, Marina peeks nervously, holding a small lamp. Jenna watches from the shadows, ready to receive the police. On the stairs, Michael appears, the will in hand, his stance now clear and resolute. Suddenly, Mercedes enters the foyer. Her once proud and elegant presence dissolves into astonishment. She beholds the scene, eyes wide. Leonardo, her kin, cornered by Thomas, the poor musician who appeared out of nowhere, and by Elisa, whom she always considered weak. Jimmy, the key to the family fortune, clings to a man shaped by the streets, not to those who were supposed to protect him. For the first time, Mercedes grasps the true weight of Damian's intentions. Beyond appearances, power, and wealth, the mansion now faces the stern gaze of encroaching justice. A silence so thick it could be cut with a knife settles in. Outside, a police car stops at the main gate. The final showdown is unfolding at the heart of the house, in the foyer where calm once reigned. Now, the masks have fallen. Thomas feels Jimmy's hand gripping his, Elisa lifts her chin, and the chess game for the Montemayor family's future enters its decisive move. The mansion's main door crashes open as the police burst in. Blue and black uniforms, flashlights, and drawn pistols, law enters a world of secrets. The officers, guided by Jenna's discreet calls and backed by Michael's evidence, move through the halls following raised voices. It is a decisive moment. Justice, late but forceful, makes its way through marble columns and costly carpets. In the foyer, Leonardo realizes there's no escape. He tries to back up, but a policeman grabs his arm. Opposite him, Rick is cornered against a wall, growling like a trapped animal. The officers disarm the men, forcing them to bow their heads. Leonardo shouts insults. "You don't know who you're dealing with. This family is untouchable." But his words are hollow, echoing off the ornate ceiling with no response. Esteban, pale-faced and trembling, approaches the officers and breaks into tears. "I didn't want to hurt anyone. I was just following orders. Please." He confesses between sobs, hoping for leniency to spare him severe punishment. He knows he played a minor role, a pawn in Leonardo and Rick's vile scheme, and fear drives him to betray his former allies. Jimmy takes refuge in Elisa's embrace, who holds him with all her soul. She cries, perhaps for the first time without restraint, relieved that her child is safe. Jimmy, frightened but protected, clings to his mother. She kisses his forehead, lulling him with halting words, begging forgiveness for not having protected him sooner, promising a different future. Mercedes, at the other end of the hall, contemplates the scene, unable to speak. The tension, the betrayal, the violence. Her world, built on a foundation of appearances, has collapsed. She sits down in an armchair, her back turned to a family portrait that now seems a mocking irony. With trembling hands, she removes a thick gold ring, a symbol of her pride and status. Tears run silently down her cheeks. She understands that power without morality is a hollow structure, doomed to topple when the light of truth reaches it. Michael, the lawyer, remains near Thomas. In his hands, he holds the copy of Damian's original will. Now, with Leonardo and Rick in police custody, the document can be fulfilled without interference. "The will is clear," he says to an officer. "Damian Montemayor allocated the fortune to charitable works as long as Jimmy grew up protected. We're ready to begin the process." The officer nods, grateful that the truth has surfaced without further detours. Thomas, arm bandaged and guitar leaning against a nearby wall, observes Marina, who has remained firmly by his side. They look into each other's eyes in silence, and in that exchange, an intangible promise emerges, an aspiration to something new and different. Both have seen misery and nobility coexist under the same roof. Both have understood that one can resist corruption with courage and compassion. As the police drag Leonardo and Rick away amid scuffles and shouts, the mansion begins to breathe differently. Elisa and Jimmy, locked in an embrace, no longer feel alone. Mercedes, staring into emptiness, drops the ring into her palm, and along with it, the arrogance that once defined her falls onto the invisible floor of her conscience. Michael, armed with the will, prepares to honor Damian's intentions. Thomas, chest tight with emotion, knows that his role in this story was worth every risk, every wound. The night, once dark and filled with conspiracies, brightens with the reflection of police sirens on the mansion's noble walls. Legal tasks lie ahead, negotiations with authorities, emotional healing to come. But the worst danger has passed. Jimmy is safe, and with him, the possibility of a just and generous future. Several days have passed since the night the police burst into the mansion and the Montemayor family's destiny changed forever. The morning sun lights up the white columns, green vines, and freshly tended flower pots. The atmosphere inside the house has changed. The air is lighter, the quiet no longer fearful, but reconciled with the truth. Voices speak at a normal volume, no furtive whispers, no stealthy footsteps at midnight, no rage-filled stares. In the main study, where once shady deals were struck or family matters discussed behind closed doors, a calm vigilance now reigns. Elisa sits in an upholstered armchair, chin raised and shoulders relaxed. Across from her, Michael reviews a folder of yellowed papers, Damian Montemayor's original will. They've begun the legal process to release the funds and allocate them to the charitable works Damian had envisioned. It's not just about fulfilling a formality, it's about bringing Damian's vision to life, allowing his fortune to become schools, cultural centers, scholarships, and stages where guitars, violins, and young voices can flourish. The process will be complex, Michael explains in a measured tone, but with these documents and the statements we've gathered, we can activate the clauses just as Damien stipulated. I'll do whatever is necessary, Elisa responds with conviction. I want this place to stop being a symbol of greed and become a source of opportunity. I owe it to Jimmy and to myself. Mercedes, who has been listening from the doorway, enters quietly. Her aristocratic bearing is still present in her posture and dress, but something in her gaze has softened. Her eyes now reflect an honest weariness, a new humility. I'm ashamed of my blindness, she admits, her voice more human than Elisa has ever heard. I never imagined that greed could penetrate so deeply into our family. Damien, he always spoke of a legacy. I didn't understand. I thought they were just idealistic notions. Now I see he left us a treasure more valuable than money, the responsibility to do good. Michael nods, pleased that Mercedes has chosen redemption over denial. With the family willing to cooperate, the bureaucratic burden feels lighter. Elisa squeezes Mercedes's hand. It's late, but not too late. Together we'll ensure Damian's wishes come true. While the Montemayor legacy's transformation moves forward inside the mansion, in the garden the sun scatters its gleams over the lawn, fountains, and blossoming rose bushes. Thomas sits on a wooden bench, his guitar resting on his lap. Next to him, Jimmy watches curiously. The boy, who for weeks found refuge in silence and distrust, now shows a different look in his eyes. Once filled with fear, they now shine with a hint of joy. Thomas places the boy's fingers on the strings, teaching him a few simple chords: C major, G, A minor. Press here, gently but firmly, Thomas instructs, guiding Jimmy's hands carefully. It doesn't matter if it sounds odd at first. What matters is feeling the vibration, listening to the note. Jimmy, charmingly timid, strums the strings, and a still clumsy sound emerges. He laughs, surprised by the nuances produced by the guitar. This is his first authentic, unguarded laugh. Thomas smiles too, as if an invisible chain between them breaks. Now the boy understands he can create something beautiful with his hands, that he is not doomed to live in fear. In a corner of the garden, Marina watches the scene. She gently strokes a green leaf, gathering the courage to approach. She has worked in the mansion discreetly, willing to help. For days she witnessed cruel acts, injustices and secrets. She saw Thomas risk his life and freedom to save a child who wasn't his own, a family that didn't belong to him, and a fortune he would never touch. She saw him with an injured arm, fear in his eyes, but never giving up. That strength, that humanity, have ignited in her a new and profound feeling. She approaches without making a sound, and when Jimmy focuses on placing his finger correctly, Marina touches Thomas's shoulder to get his attention. He looks up, surprised and pleased to find her there. With a soft voice, she speaks the words she's been holding back. Thomas, I admire your courage. I've never seen anyone risk so much for others without asking for anything in return. When you arrived, you seemed like an outsider. But today, I feel that this place, all of us, owe you something. And I do too. Thomas notices that Jimmy is still trying to form the chord, so he asks the boy for a moment. He sets the guitar on the bench and moves closer to Marina. Their eyes meet, and in that silent exchange, something new blossoms. It's not just gratitude or respect, it's the seed of a deeper affection. Marina, without your help, I couldn't have protected Jimmy, Thomas answers, sincerity welling up in his chest. Nor could I have discovered the truth about the will or found the courage to stay. Your support, your presence, meant a lot. She lowers her gaze shyly but smiles. She feels that the world opening up before them is no longer enclosed by the miseries of greed, but inhabited by people who have chosen good. Thomas, not breaking eye contact, steps closer. No grand declarations or pompous gestures are needed. With the sun shining on their faces, their feelings show in the brightness of their eyes, the gentle curve of their lips. Jimmy, finally producing a more harmonious sound from the guitar, laughs as he discovers he can turn metal and wood into music. That laughter warms the garden's air. Elisa, from a window, watches with emotion. Mercedes, farther away, wipes a tear. Michael, will in hand, walks toward the municipal offices to begin the paperwork. Jenna, behind the curtains, smiles discreetly, satisfied that after so much darkness, the light has found its way. In that garden, now the center of a new equilibrium, Thomas and Marina understand that their destiny has changed. A possible future awaits, with Jimmy learning music, Elisa and Mercedes united by a noble purpose, scholarships and cultural centers about to emerge from paper into reality. And between them, the promise of genuine affection, of supportive looks, of steps taken together toward a fairer horizon. The peace floating in the air has the texture of a clear sunrise. The bird's song, the rustling leaves in the breeze, the timid strum of the guitar under small fingers, everything composes a melody of hope. The mansion, once a symbol of misunderstood power, slowly transforms into the pillar of a network of solidarity that Damian once imagined. Thomas, with Marina by his side, feels stronger, more complete, as if his youthful dream of becoming a famous musician gives way to a greater dream, to change lives, one note at a time, one vibrating string in the vast silence. Afternoon stretches over the barrio with an amber glow. The puddles in the dirt streets reflect a clear sky, and the air smells of simple meals cooking in humble kitchens. This is not a place of luxuries or grand promises, but one of true bonds. Thomas and Jimmy walk along the main street, kicking up dust with slow steps. Thomas carries his guitar over his shoulder, a bit battered but steady, like a loyal witness to all they've lived through. Jimmy, holding his protector's hand, looks curiously at the landscape that once greeted him with hunger, but now extends before him with a certain warmth. There's something in the way the boy observes the peeling walls, the dangling wires, the broken windows, a calm acceptance of the past, and at the same time, an expectation of the future. Turning a corner, Rafa, the newspaper seller, spots them. He startles. He hadn't expected to see Thomas so soon, let alone accompanied by the child who caused his mysterious departure. Mrs. Margaret, at her door with her apron stained with flour, squints to recognize the figure walking against the sunlight. Gradually, other neighbors approach, curious. The barber who works with old but skillful scissors, the woman who sells empanadas from a basket, a couple of skinny youths who always linger on street corners with little to do. Each of them peeks out, drawn by the presence of Thomas, the musician who left in luxury cars and about whom Alfred spread poisonous rumors. "Thomas!" Rafa exclaims, newspaper under his arm, voice trembling. "You've come back! What? What happened?" Mrs. Margaret, with her motherly demeanor, dries her hands on her apron and steps forward. Her face shows a mixture of relief and caution. She wants to believe him, but Alfred's words linger in her mind. However, when her eyes meet Thomas's, she senses something different, an undeniable truth reflected there, and a tenderness in how he holds Jimmy's hand. It's not the expression of a man who sold himself to the highest bidder. It's the look of someone who fought against injustice and returned carrying a complex story. "Mrs. Margaret, Rafa," Thomas greets them softly. His throat feels dry. He returned to this barrio with the weight of a fulfilled mission, but also with the need to clear up doubts. "I know you heard things, that lies were told. I've come to tell you the truth." Murmurs rise. Some neighbors gather around, arms crossed. An expectant silence falls over the street. There's the distant hum of a radio, the creak of tin roofs, the song of a bird perched on a wire. Thomas takes a breath and begins. "I left here in a caravan of cars that weren't mine, not by choice and not out of betrayal. I found Jimmy alone, hungry, and I gave him my last coin. It turned out he was the child of the Montemayor family, a very powerful family. They took me to their mansion with promises, intrigued by what I'd done. But there I discovered a nest of intrigues, a will that could change the destiny of many. This child you see here, he says, gently placing his hand on Jimmy's shoulder, was the key to ensuring the Montemayor fortune didn't just fill a few pockets, but was used to help people like us, like you, like me, like the children of this neighborhood. A murmur of surprise ripples through the circle of neighbors. Rafa wrinkles his newspaper, eyes wide. Mrs. Margaret places a hand on her chest, trying to process these words. The barber removes his cap and twists it nervously. Even the young men at the corner stop joking to listen intently. "What are you saying, Thomas?" asks one neighbor, incredulous. "Charities? Scholarships? For us?" "Exactly that," Thomas confirms, nodding. The family's patriarch, Damian Montemayor, stipulated that if Jimmy stayed here, alive and well, part of the fortune would serve the community. Cultural projects, scholarships, learning centers, instruments for children who dream of music. I didn't sell out, friends. I fought against those who wanted to harm Jimmy to get the money. I risked my neck, with help from good people in that house, to ensure Damian's will was honored. Jimmy observes the astonished faces around him, holding Thomas's hand tighter. He feels the warmth of this community. They're poor, yes, but not lacking in nobility. For the first time, the child senses that they look at him not as a stranger, but with a new respect. He timidly raises his other hand and waves silently, a child's gesture that sparks subtle smiles. Mrs. Margaret wipes away a tear that escapes without asking. After a minute, Rafa lets out a nervous laugh. "Look at that. And we thought you'd sold yourself like an old rag, Thomas," he admits, voice breaking. "Forgive us, man. That snake Alfred filled our heads with doubts." "I can't judge you," Thomas replies humbly. "I didn't know what I'd find when I left in those cars. I just ask you to trust me. Something big is coming. Music schools, books, workshops. What Damian Montemayor left behind wasn't to make us rich, but to give us tools, so no child in this barrio grows up without a path open to them." The neighbors exchange astonished glances. One asks if there will be guitar classes, another worries if there will be notebooks and pencils for the kids who can't afford school supplies. Thomas answers that this is the plan, to use the resources for everyone's benefit. Voices blend into a chorus of surprise and hope. What was pure skepticism minutes ago now transforms into shared excitement, a joyful vibration that fills the streets. Rafa, trying to regain composure, holds up his newspaper like a banner. "Tomorrow I'll tell the story in these old pages. Let the whole barrio know our Thomas fought for us." Mrs. Margaret, moved, calls Thomas and Jimmy. "Come, children, I have soup on the stove, a bowl to warm your hearts and celebrate this news." Thomas chuckles softly and accepts the invitation. Jimmy, gripping his hand, smiles with a note of trust. Walking these streets again, feeling the dust underfoot, and now seeing joy on familiar faces, confirms for Thomas that he not only refused to sell out, he brought back a light of hope amid poverty. As the afternoon turns reddish and the sun sets over peeling facades, Thomas and Jimmy pass through Mrs. Margaret's door, surrounded by curious and kind neighbors. Alfred doesn't appear. Perhaps he's hiding, watching his lies crumble in the air. What remains now is a barrio awakening from resignation, understanding that they are not condemned to perpetual misery. There's a future, there are promises, and opportunities just around the corner. At the center of that hope is Thomas, the street musician who dared to face greed to rescue everyone's tomorrow. Weeks later, the barrio transforms into a scene of new colors and sounds. The chipped walls of an old building, once abandoned, now shine with a fresh coat of paint and murals filled with cheerful forms and lines. A simple hand-painted sign announces Montemayor Cultural Center. Among scaffolding still being dismantled, Workers and volunteers finish putting up shelves filled with books, musicians tune violins and guitars, and small chairs are arranged for future students. There's a smell of fresh paint, new paper, and above all, collective enthusiasm. In the improvised entrance courtyard, neighbors gather. Ordinary clothes, sun-worn faces, but also wide smiles and bright eyes for what's happening. Among them, Rafa waves his stack of newspapers, shouting the news, "Today's the big day. The cultural center opens its doors, a new beginning for the bario." The pages feature articles detailing the origins of this metamorphosis, how Damian Montemayor's will and the courage of certain individuals turned a fortune into real opportunities. Neighbors buy the newspaper, discuss the articles, congratulating each other as if this achievement belonged to them all. Mrs. Margaret, apron stained with sugar and flour, hands out homemade sweets. These are small portions of a simple dessert, but people accept them gratefully. Each bite is a tiny celebration. She smiles at the children running around, knowing that within these freshly painted walls they'll find books, music, and, hopefully, a more generous future. At the center of the bustle stand, Elisa and Mercedes. They're not dressed extravagantly or adorned with ostentatious jewels. They chose simple clothing, soft-toned dresses without excessive adornments, to make it clear that they are here not as ladies of high society, but as women committed to the community's rebirth. They hold a humble ribbon across the main entrance. Michael, the lawyer, stands to one side, hands behind his back and a serene smile. Esteban, head bowed but trying, brings boxes of books for the center's library. His movements are clumsy, but sincere. He knows he has much to atone for, and each book he places on the shelves is a step toward redemption. Jimmy, the boy around whom this entire conflict revolved, runs around with other neighborhood kids. He laughs, shouts, plays chase as a rag ball passes from hand to hand. The night of the kidnapping attempt feels like a distant bad memory. Now, warmed by laughter, Jimmy is simply a happy child in an environment that promises to nurture his dreams. His mother, Elisa, raises a sharp pair of scissors and looks at Mercedes. The two exchange a glance of understanding and, with a shared gesture, cut the ribbon. Applause erupts spontaneously. Someone strums a guitar chord at that exact moment, and the sound vibrates in the dusty barrio air. The cultural center's door is now open, symbolically and practically to everyone. Among those present, Thomas and Marina stand close without need for grand words. He with his guitar, she with that gesture of contained affection. They're part of this collective achievement. Thomas, the street musician who once left in luxury cars only to confront a family's intrigues, now sees the fruits of his efforts. Not wealth for a few, but newly acquired musical instruments, a piano in a corner, piles of storybooks, art manuals, paints, notebooks. Children who used to spend their days wandering aimlessly in the street will now have a place to learn, create, and express themselves. Marina's eyes grow moist, seeing the family's happiness as they enter the center, examining instruments, leafing through illustrated books. Thomas squeezes Marina's hand affectionately and whispers, "Look at what we've achieved. This was Damian's dream, and now it's the dream of all of us." People enter and leave through the new threshold. Their exclamations fill the air as they see the walls covered in colorful paintings, the music room with stands and guitars on racks, the reading corner with cushions and a worn but clean rug. Rafa, with his newspapers, approaches Thomas and pats him on the shoulder. "Brother, I never imagined something like this. I thought you'd sold out. Sorry for doubting you, but you came back with a revolution up your sleeve." Thomas smiles, forgiving him with a look, no hard feelings. "Life surprises us, Rafa. What matters is that now we all see that change is possible." Mrs. Margaret makes her way through with her basket of sweets. "Take one. They're sweets to celebrate." She offers them to Thomas, Marina, Elisa, and Mercedes. The two women who once seemed distant figures now look at her with gratitude. Elisa and Mercedes accept a piece, savoring this humble dessert that symbolizes the essence of the barrio: solidarity, flavor, generous kindness without fanfare. Esteban, sweating from carrying so many boxes, takes a breather and looks around. He sees Jimmy playing, Elisa smiling, Mercedes stripped of her haughtiness, and the barrio filling the building with its energy. He lowers his head in respect, silently trying to make amends with his conscience. He knows he has a long way to go before being truly forgiven, but supporting the cultural center is a start. As the afternoon goes on, music springs forth spontaneously. One neighbor pulls out a harmonica, another a Peruvian cajon, and soon an improvised melody settles among the crowd. The children dance, uncoordinated but genuinely joyful. Women's laughter, applause, voices telling stories. All these murmurs of life become the soundtrack of the barrio, lifting its spirit. Holding Marina's hand, Thomas walks around the place. They stop at the instruments section, and he imagines himself teaching guitar to a handful of curious children. Marina sees a shelf full of science books and imagines reading with the youngest kids, showing them a world beyond the narrow streets they know. Together, they contemplate the infinite possibilities of this newly inaugurated space. As the sunlight turns more golden, casting long shadows on the freshly painted walls, the community realizes something irrevocable has changed. Here, at the cultural center, new stories will be woven, talents will be nurtured, knowledge will be shared. Elisa, lifting her gaze toward a portrait of Damian that hangs in a corner, smiles through contained tears. "Thank you, Papa," she whispers, hoping her voice reaches the memory of that man who imagined the greatness of generosity. On the center's threshold, Jimmy stops for a moment, looks at Thomas, and runs to him. The musician kneels, and the child leaps into his arms. This embrace, with the laughter and music in the background, proves that it was all worth it. All the fortune, danger, and betrayal have led to this point. A dusty corner of the barrio turned into the root of lasting hope. The celebration continues until the first stars appear in the sky. As night falls, the cultural center remains open and bright, like a beacon in the dimness. People return home carrying a new feeling, the conviction that with will and solidarity, it's possible to transform even the hardest realities. And in that renewed heart, where Thomas, Jimmy, Marina, Elisa, Mercedes, and so many others have come together, they have planted the seed of a different future. The new cultural center breathes with the pulse of hope. A few weeks have passed since its inauguration, and the voices filling its rooms are no longer curious murmurs, but the heartbeat of a community in bloom. A fresh breeze drifts in through the refurbished windows, and the afternoon light creates moving mosaics of brightness on the floor. Here, where there was once only dust and abandonment, there is now laughter, musical notes, the careful turning of book pages, and dreams putting down roots. In one of the larger rooms, they've improvised something like a music classroom. There are no luxury chairs or formal desks, only stools made from recycled wood, colorful cushions, and even a fruit crate turned upside down serving as a seat. In the center, surrounded by a semicircle of children with expectant eyes, sits Thomas, the same man who once earned a few coins playing guitar on the street, who honed his art on dusty corners and endured the condescending looks of those who saw him as a nobody, is now an admired teacher. Holding his guitar, still worn but with its warm timbre intact, Thomas speaks kindly. "Do you see this chord?" he asks, placing his fingers carefully on the strings. "It's called C major. It's a common bass. Listen." He strums a sequence of soft notes. The children tilt their heads, fascinated, attentive to the simple melody. Jimmy, seated among the others, taps a tambourine timidly in rhythm. The child who once was elusive and scared now laughs freely. Each sound seems to heal an invisible scar. Thomas explains rhythms, the difference between one-time signature and another, how to place the right hand so the guitar sings. The children's eyes, bright like marbles, try to imitate the teacher's gesture. Some are shyer, others dare to pluck the strings clumsily, but all share the excitement of realizing they can create beauty with their own fingers. This isn't just a music class, it's a lesson in confidence and self-esteem. Here, no child feels undeserving of an instrument. No one says music is for someone else. Suddenly, from the side of the makeshift classroom, a gentle, soft voice is heard. Marina enters with a quiet smile. She carries a notebook with song lyrics and stands near Thomas. He looks at her with understanding, and without a word, he strums the introduction of a simple, hopeful melody. Marina closes her eyes for a few seconds before beginning to sing. Her voice flows like a clear stream over smooth stones, not loud or forced, rather a melodic whisper that caresses the ears. The children sit up straighter, even the most distracted now still, enchanted. The song speaks of new days, of winds carrying seeds of change, of flowers blooming where before there were only barren lands. It speaks of the importance of supporting each other as a community, sharing bread, laughter, and the notes of a song. Thomas accompanies Marina's voice with simple chords, sometimes plucking the strings to highlight the sweetness. Jimmy, excited, shakes the tambourine, and the metallic sound of the little jingles blends into the music. Other children clap softly, marking the pulse, creating a small, improvised orchestra. As the song progresses, some of the braver children try humming the melody. Marina, noticing their participation, encourages them with a warm glance. This is not a formal performance, nor does it seek perfection. It's an act of communion, weaving voices together without fear of being off-key. What matters is feeling, participating, knowing you're part of something bigger. Outside the music classroom, in a bright hallway, Michael watches the scene from a distance. The lawyer who once hesitated about his path now walks serenely, discreetly checking that Damian Montemayor's funds are used transparently. He doesn't interfere or give orders. He just ensures that instruments, books, and building maintenance are managed with rigor and honesty. He's the silent guardian of the patriarch's will. Seeing Thomas, the children, and Marina blossom through music, Michael knows the legal effort was worth it. The will's clauses weren't whims, but a map leading to social justice. Jenna, the mansion's housekeeper, also arrives at the door without entering. With her usual discretion, she peeks in and contemplates the scene. She remembers Damian's solemnity, her former patron, and his determination that the fortune be a tool of transformation. Jenna smiles with her eyes, pleased to see his legacy fulfilled. There is no greater homage to that man's memory than the bustling sound of children learning chords, the murmur of new book pages being turned, laughter woven together with simple melodies. As Marina finishes the last note of the song, Thomas lets the final chord fade into the air. Some children applaud timidly, others stand up to hug Jimmy, who contributed with his tambourine. The boy laughs, more relaxed, more integrated. This image, a small band of children united by music, is the herald of many bright days to come. Perhaps in the future, one of these children will become a professional musician, or simply learn to love art and knowledge. Perhaps one of them, inspired by this experience, will teach others, multiplying the seed Damian planted without them knowing. As they leave the classroom, a few curious neighbors peek in, interested in what's happening. They find a warm atmosphere, a teacher without a university degree, but with a noble heart, a singer who never graced grand stages, but moves them with her tenderness, and a child who overcame fear to become a budding musician. This is the essence of the cultural center. No oppressive hierarchies, no elitism, only the desire to share the gift of beauty. The walls, clean and decorated with the children's posters and drawings, seem to breathe in rhythm with the music. Michael withdraws, satisfied in his discreet supervisory role. Jenna leaves with a gentle gesture, comforted to see the future being consolidated in every laugh and every note. Thomas and Marina, surrounded by children asking for another song, smile, unable to contain their joy. Jimmy, hugging his tambourine against his chest, climbs onto a little stool and declares in a clear voice, "I want to learn another song." And the class continues, redoubling its enthusiasm. As the afternoon slides into dusk and the last rays of sunlight filter through the windows, the cultural center fills with echoes, the strumming of a guitar, Marina's singing voice, children's laughter, the soft footsteps of those coming and going. Everyone knows now that, thanks to a visionary will and the courage of a street musician turned teacher, the bario is no longer the same. Here, in each chord, each opened book, each child's laugh, the heart of true change beats. The afternoon sun spreads over the bario with a warmth that is no longer merely climatic. It is the human warmth that permeates its streets. Where once there were peeling walls and faded graffiti, now a large, vibrantly colored mural decorates the facade of the cultural center. The painting shows children playing instruments, open books, joined hands, and flowers sprouting from cracks, capturing the community's renewed spirit. Before, the air seemed heavy. Today it feels light and full of promises. The neighbors, once absorbed in their own survival, now pause to chat. Elderly people seated on makeshift stools talk about the latest news from the center, commenting on how much things have changed. Children's laughter echoes at the corners, while the sound of some instrument escapes through a half-opened window. Those who once doubted now sense that something profound has taken root, a hope that no one can deny. Inside the cultural center, the shelves of newly arranged books and the stands holding gleaming instruments bear witness to the change. Children who grew up amid uncertainty now explore new horizons. They strum a guitar, leaf through an illustrated storybook, imagine scenarios they never knew existed. Many of the barrio's inhabitants collaborate, each in their own way, contributing time, knowledge, or a steady hand to hold ladders and hang decorations. The transformation owes itself to everyone. In a corner, Jimmy smiles beside his mother, Elisa. The closeness between them is greater than ever. She looks at her son with pride, recalling how much she suffered, fearing she might lose him. Now, seeing him run with other children, she understands that his future is safe. Near an old photo of Damian, Mercedes stops to reflect. She senses the absence of her former hollow pride. She understands that, had she grasped the patriarch's vision earlier, they would have found this path without so much painful intrigue. Her gaze, softened by the lessons learned, rests for a moment on Damian's image, silently thanking him for his legacy. Thomas and Marina, standing in the courtyard, contemplate the scene shoulder to shoulder. He with his guitar slung over his shoulder, she with a songbook in her hands. They smile at each other without speaking. They know that music was the bridge, the common language that united so many souls. Thus, without ostentation, elbow to elbow, they begin to imagine a shared future. For them, having been part of this rebirth is the greatest reward. Their eyes shine, thinking of the melodies they will teach, the stories they will share, and the people their notes will reach. Esteban, at some distance, works hard repositioning boxes of books. His role is modest but determined. Each action is an attempt to make amends for past mistakes. No one reproaches him. On the contrary, his work is welcomed and needed. Michael, further away, discreetly supervises the management of the funds. He does not impose himself, only observes to ensure everything is done with the honesty that defined the original intention. Jenna, the housekeeper who knows both yesterday and today, passes by silently, pleased to see Damian's will fulfilled in the hopeful eyes of the children. Outside the freshly painted walls, the entire barrio becomes involved in the change. Rafa announces the good news aloud to anyone who will listen. Mrs. Margaret offers sweets and homemade snacks, spreading her generosity to all. There are no longer rumors to sully Thomas's name or mistrust toward little Jimmy. What reigns now is the certainty that things can be different, that inequalities can be softened with art, education, and willpower. In the distance, barely visible, The Montemayor mansion remains, but it no longer dominates the scene. It has gone from being the center of intrigues to becoming a silent symbol of the past. Now the true action, the life that pulses, is found in the cultural center and the streets surrounding it. There, in that once abandoned building, is the heart of change. Workshops for children, books for curious minds, guitars for those who wish to sing their aspirations. The sun begins to set, tinting roofs and the colorful mural with orange. Across the horizon, the light envelops everything in a warm caress. In the cultural center, a gentle melody drawn by Thomas from his guitar can be heard. It is harmonious, full, far from the melancholy with which he once earned a few coins on the street. Now his notes sound free, generous, like the river of affection flowing through the barrio. This is the lasting image. Children laughing with instruments in their hands, older people telling stories with a newfound calm, women and men collaborating without expecting anything in return. Elisa, Jimmy, Mercedes, Esteban, Michael, Jenna, Marina, and Thomas give meaning to this new stage. The fortune that would have rotted in greed now flows toward the people, toward their education, their art, their future. Hope and social justice have found their home, and Thomas's sweet, steady music bids farewell to this time of struggles and rebirths, revealing a future where light, knowledge, and solidarity reign without shadows. The story we have just traveled through is, in itself, a journey that begins in misery and neglect and culminates in the construction of a more just and supportive community. It's an itinerary that can be reflected in many realities, whether in dusty cities or marginal barrios where opulence coexists with poverty and opportunities always seem to favor those who have more. However, this story shows us something different. It reveals that amid precariousness and inequalities, acts of kindness can arise, tiny gestures that plant enormous seeds. Thomas's action in sharing his last coin with Jimmy, a hungry and unprotected child, is the starting point. In one sense, it's a minuscule, almost imperceptible act amid the sea of misfortunes around them. Yet that coin is a symbol of pure generosity. Thomas, who has nothing, gives up the little he owns to ease another's suffering. In that gesture, a fundamental principle is recognized. Humanity is not measured by the abundance of resources, but by the capacity for compassion and empathy toward others. And that simple act triggers a series of events that gradually tear down the barriers separating social classes, ingrained customs, and petty ambitions. The story plunges us into a striking contrast, from dusty streets and resigned poverty to restrained opulence, the elegant mansion, and the intricate twists of family disputes. Between these two parallel worlds, Thomas becomes an unlikely bridge. He, who barely survived by singing with his guitar, ends up having a decisive influence on the destiny of a powerful family, and in turn, on the future of an entire barrio. It's revealing to note the role played by Jimmy, the child. His figure is not only that of an endangered heir, but also that of a catalyst, a hidden key in Damian's will that opens the door to the common good. Jimmy is the axis that allows accumulated wealth to be directed toward philanthropy, scholarships, and cultural centers. Thus, the plot questions the inherited notion of money. What's the use of accumulating it if it doesn't improve other people's lives? Here, fortune is not an end in itself, but a means to uplift an entire community. The profound reflection left by this story centers on the transformative power of solidarity and education. It's not just about the rich sharing their money, but about how that capital is invested to create real opportunities, books for those who can't afford them, musical instruments for those who never imagined creating beautiful sounds, classes and workshops to open young minds to a different future. The cultural center symbolizes the possibility of redemption not only for one family, but for a system that often ignores those who have the least. When wealth is integrated into people's lives, it becomes the engine of change that transcends generations. On the other hand, the story invites us to examine the internal tensions of a powerful family that, locked in its mansion, had lost touch with the real world's needs. Money had corroded their integrity, made them fearful and greedy. However, the arrival of Thomas and Jimmy, the need to protect the child and safeguard the will, forces a painful mirror. What do you do with wealth when it doesn't serve to improve collective life? The guilt, shame, and tears of the family members, as well as Mercedes's transformation in recognizing the error of her arrogance, teach us that nobility does not come with surnames or opulence, but with the capacity to acknowledge injustice and change course. The presence of characters like Jenna, Marina, and Michael also shows the value of scattered wills joining together around a just cause. Not everyone can be a visible hero like Thomas, but many can be subtle gears, contributing their quiet effort, their honesty, their ability to manage resources transparently. The sum of those small loyalties, gestures, and commitments makes possible what once seemed utopian, that the Montemayor fortune becomes the seed of prosperity for a marginalized barrio. In its final scenes, the story evokes the idea of an altered order, a poetic justice that redirects the destiny of people. The barrio becomes brighter, relationships more humane, and education, culture, and art occupy center stage. The music that once served as mere subsistence now becomes a bridge for dignity, creation, and unity. Each chord, Thomas teaches, each book someone studies in the cultural center, each child's smile upon finding a path is another step toward a more equitable society. The deepest reflection is this: true social transformations do not come only from great structures, but also from small acts of kindness, outstretched hands, the individual courage of those who refuse to accept the status quo of injustice. A coin shared with a hungry child becomes the spark that sets the prairie of indifference ablaze, unveiling conspiracies and forcing the powerful to be accountable. The story shows us that compassion can trigger seismic movements in the foundations of inequality, and that wealth, when steered away from selfish pursuits, can serve as the foundation of a more generous world. In the end, what remains is a lesson that transcends these pages. Our humanity lies in the ability to see the other as an equal, to understand that social, economic, and cultural boundaries are not insurmountable walls. It is possible, as long as there is will, to open spaces of encounter, to exchange knowledge, to share bread, melody, and understanding. This story reminds us that hope is not an empty word, but a collective endeavor built day by day, gesture by gesture, and that each one of us can contribute to that construction. The reflection, therefore, is that solidarity, education, and culture not only improve individual lives, but have the potential to redeem entire communities. In a world where greed and indifference often prevail, the story invites us to believe in the power of empathy, justice, and generosity as forces of social transformation. And it leaves us with the certainty that even in the most adverse conditions, a selfless act can spark a light capable of illuminating the horizon for many. Friends, thank you for joining us until the end of this story filled with hope and second chances. We have seen how an act of kindness can ignite a spark that not only transforms a barrio, but the course of many lives. This adventure reminds us that with solidarity and empathy, even the harshest realities can change. If this journey moved you as much as it did me, don't forget to subscribe, give it a like, and share this video. Your comments and reflections are always welcome. Together, we'll keep discovering stories that inspire us to be more just, more human, and more generous. See you next time. And remember, with a single musical note, with a sincere gesture, we can sow the hope the world needs.